So welcome to Empowered, our series Back to the Future. And what a guest we have for our listeners today. Hello, Matthew Griffin.
Hey, Craig. That's it. Hey, everyone. That's it. How you all doing?
I'm excited, Matt. I'm excited to prod and ask you questions to see what your thoughts are about the future of the fitness industry. So, Matt, you are an award-winning futurist and international keynote speaker. So you are based in the UK, but not very much in the UK in terms of what you get out and about. So keen to learn about what you learn about the fitness industry while you're in all your different continents, which I know you are.
Yeah.
Matt is the founder of 311 Institute, a global futures and deep futures consultancy working with many different industries, which is even a separate fascinating point, Matt, that you must be talking about many different things, and it'd be great to kind of pick your brains about that as well. But we are keen to learn a little bit more of what your insights of what the future is in, especially in the fitness industry.
Yeah.
So, Matt, why are you here talking about the fitness industry when you are talking about different industries?
Yeah. So, well, firstly, you asked me, so, thank you very much for that. So that's a big one, let's face it. However, my background is I'm an FTA 3 certified personal trainer. So not a lot of people actually know that about me. So I qualified about 20 years ago. I've always been active in sports, even in my childhood. So, for example, cycling, the typical sports, but, cycling, rugby, football, cave diving. I do a cross-country run every single day. So typically between 5 to 10K. Mainly because I didn't really have much better to do. So, not necessarily because I wanted to, but, I enjoyed it nonetheless. And when I was about 18, I ended up sort of going down to Premier Global down in Somerset, where, qualified as a PT. So I've stood behind the desk many a times, basically staring blankly at customers, basically while they stare blankly back at me. So that's always, great. My customer service skills know no bounds. And I've kept it up ever since, just staring blankly at customers, basically while they actually still stare back at me. And even as a futurist. So I work with the vast majority of the world's largest organizations, and some of the world's largest organizations that I have the most fun with are actually in both the sports industry. So, whether we're talking about things like personal training, basically like yourselves, basically, or whether it's sort of Nike, Adidas, companies like Decathlon, basically in the apparel space, but also sort of organizations in the esports space. And I know that we can have some conversations about, is that really a sport, as everyone keeps saying? And I know plenty of people that'll pummel me, basically, if we say that esports isn't a sport. So I'm going to stay sort of fairly clear of that. But, when we actually have a look at the future of health and fitness, it's integral to the human condition. We've seen a huge amount of disruption through COVID and all of the different lockdowns that we've actually now had, I think, on the UK. But, we've had 4 now in the sort of past couple of years. And I think people are now getting to the point where they actually really appreciate their own health, but actually just appreciate having a walk outside, let alone getting down to a gym, a sports event, whatever it happens to be. So, there's lots to chat through.
Definitely. And my eyes lit up when we first met, and we actually did our premier training probably more or less within a 12-month period with one another.
That's it, which is a small world.
Yeah, absolutely. And the amount of people that you kind of come across who have done premier from like 15 years ago, it was a really good qualification, and still is around today, which shows its length of service. So in terms of going into the topics, what are the tools that gyms and trainers can start to utilize, Matt, from your perspective, to start educating themselves to then educate the users?
So the first thing is basically, I would say gyms, but PTs, basically, and anyone involved in the fitness industry, they've got to be personable. Fundamentally, this is still a face-to-face business. Even though basically we see an increasing number of, for example, digital humans, basically with the likes of Nike and Adidas, basically who are increasingly starting to do, for example, should we say screen-based coaching? And that's a whole sort of conversation in itself, which we can sort of touch on later. We've got the likes of Joe Wicks, basically where, the vast majority of his customers basically have never actually ever met him. They've just only ever seen him through either a computer screen or a TV screen. But I always think basically to get the best out of people, you've got to engage them face to face. You've got to be able to interact with them at a personable level. So that's the first thing. Get to know your customers basically at a personal level. Try to keep engagement levels high, but from try to understand what their physical and mental health goals are, and the timelines and all that kind of stuff. Basically, sort of figure out where you can actually add the most value. But from a understanding the customer perspective, if we start looking at what we can do with technology, we have technologies or trends basically like the quantified self. So, and this is sort of where it can be a little bit hard for gyms, because ultimately, say, for example, people are wearing wearables, whether it's smart clothes, whether it is different sensors around their body, whether it's smart watches, which are obviously the common one, whether they're even using sort of new, what we call earable computing platforms, which are built into headphones, because you can actually detect people's pulses through headphones, all that kind of stuff. When you actually have a look at our ability to gather more and more quantified self data on an individual's biomarkers, biochemistry, biomechanics, as well as just plain old biometrics, increasingly, basically as well, their diets, their genomes, and all sorts of crazy things, there's a lot that we can actually do. So, for example, we've got wearables that are going to be starting to come through that can detect cortisol levels in the blood. So, as a gym owner, if you have partnered with an organization that lets you access that patient data, and provided the patient is happy for you to actually access that data, you can, on the one hand, start seeing that your client basically has now started their journey to the gym, because using GPS in phones, we can figure out that, at 10 o'clock, they normally leave to come to the gym and they take this particular route and everything else. So on the one hand, we can figure out that the person is probably going to arrive at our gym in the next 10 minutes. So you can actually have someone meet and greet them. That's the first thing. Secondly, if we have access to some of their quantified self data, let's say, for example, cortisol data, we can figure out how stressed they are. So we can say, hey, John, look, welcome to Gym A. We've just got this feeling that you're a little bit stressed. So, how are you actually feeling today? Are you a little bit stressed? And John go, yeah, I had a naff Zoom call. Hate those Zoom calls. They're rubbish. Can't wait to get back out into the real world again. In which case, you can just use that simple single piece of data around cortisol levels to change the type of program that you might give him or her basically during that sort of first 10, 20 minutes, let alone basically when we start having a look at things like, blood pressure levels, when we start having a look at LDL, HDL, cholesterol levels, which again, basically there's wearables just actually starting to come out now that can sense cholesterol levels through the skin. So that's coming out through China. When we start having a look at pulse data, when we start having a look at biomechanical data, we can figure out again that John has come into the gym, and even before he's come into the gym, using this quantified self data, we can figure out that actually his gait's a bit off, so maybe he's actually injured an ankle or something like that. So there's huge amounts of data that we can increasingly capture from individuals. And if gym owners have access to that data, if they understand what that data means, if they understand how to combine it together, you can almost hyper-personalize the program on a hour-by-hour basis for the person who's actually coming down to the gym, or the track, or whatever it happens to be. It doesn't just have to be gyms. And, even things like glucose levels. We can monitor glucose levels. We can then say, well, okay, maybe you need some GI foods, just before you go down to the track. We can track things like levels of lactic acid, basically within blood, using wearables as well. Lactic acid recovery, VO2 maxes. There's all kinds of different things that we can actually measure. But generally, and this is where, if you go to an Olympic committee, for example, if you go to the British Olympic Committee, the US Olympic Committees, whatever it happens to be, there is now no elite performance coach that would get rid of their access to big data and these data sets. They are absolutely pivotal. So while the vast majority of gym goers basically are just going to be amateurs, let's face it, I want to bulk up. I want to be able to lift a slightly heavier weight, basically without feeling crippled. I want to be able to run 100 meters, basically without throwing up, basically on the finish line, all this kind of stuff. There's still a lot of different types of data and a lot of different data sets and sources that we can actually combine together to actually help them achieve their goals faster. And again, there's a lot of people basically who work in the gym industry will know, the dropout rates, particularly when people start plateauing, basically is actually really high. So on the one hand, you've got to keep that engagement up. But we can use this data, as well as the PT's own professional instincts, to understand when people are plateauing. Then again, we can change the programs. So, I suppose basically the question that I would actually have for listeners is, are you actually making the most basically of some of these quantified self platforms? Who are you actually partnering with? What data do you actually have access to? Do your staff actually understand what all of this data means, or even some of it means? Even down to when we have a look at things like smart clothing, EMG sensors by which sense muscle tension, for example, they can detect form. So, when we have someone that's actually benching, we can either use artificial intelligence and camera systems in gyms, or we can actually use smart clothing to figure out that someone's form is off. Now, when we start talking about sort of the more elite end of the spectrum as well, we have artificial intelligence, which is increasingly becoming a sports coach in itself. And we have trackside camera systems. We can figure out that which you can put next to a treadmill, for example. If we see someone sprinting on a treadmill, these AIs can increasingly understand what their biomechanics actually look like. They can compare, if you want to be a sprinter, they can compare your biomechanics, basically with the biomechanics and strides of, for example, Usain Bolt. And then these AIs increasingly come back and say, well, increase your stride length by this, drop down a little bit, basically, make sure your knee basically is, 80 degrees when it's actually pounding, think about the frequency of your steps, get to 90, increase your stride length and all these sorts of other things. So there's a lot of, almost too much, but there's a lot of information coming down the line that in some cases is really helpful and people just would never do without. And in other cases is an interesting complementary aid, basically, particularly when we start talking about, amateurs basically down gyms.
Yeah, completely. And just to take a step back, when you were talking through that journey that you're going to the gym, and your gym actually then understands that you're on the way to the gym.
Yeah.
I've had many, many, many fun conversations of how digital will replace people.
Yeah.
And it's not that.
No.
What it's doing is it's giving the power of information to the person to make it more personalized.
Yeah, absolutely. It's augmenting the customer experience as well as the PT experience. And I mean, again, say for example, so using both the microphones and smartphones, but also using other wearables, you can increasingly detect the onset of things like dementia, but also heart disease, PTSD, cancers, and everything else. But if we actually kind of focus basically on heart disease, for example, there are PTs there basically with specialisms in things like heart disease and cardiac, et cetera, et cetera. If we have access to a patient's data and that data is showing us that, the person's lungs are actually filling with fluid, bearing in mind that is something that you can pick up on a vocal biomarker just by listening to someone's voice, so hence artificial intelligence plus microphone equals, an ability to detect the onset of heart disease. Then from a PT perspective, when they actually get into the gym, we can actually say, well, look, we've sort of picked up some rather interesting biomarkers basically from, the data that we've actually been seeing from you that indicate that maybe your heart health could actually do with improving. Now, on the one hand, we all know, but you'd sort of have to refer them to a GP and everything else and say, look, just go and get a checkout. But nevertheless, having access to even that sort of vocal biomarker information from a PT's perspective now means that we are able to almost predict. In fact, we can in the healthcare space, in the actual healthcare space, increasingly we're able to predict the onset of disease, ailments, conditions, and syndromes like heart disease. And so from a PT's perspective, you could say, well, we're detecting some rather strange vocal biomarker signatures from you, which might indicate the early onset of heart disease. So firstly, go and see your GP. When you come back from your GP and, they've sort of given you a full check, what we're going to do is we're going to put you on a slightly modified program. We're going to put you onto a sort of a gentle cardio program, and we're just going to start working that through. We're also going to go and have a look at your diet as well. So again, there's a lot of information that we can actually use at a granular level, not just to help people improve their health in the way that they think that we as PTs can help them improve their health, but we can increasingly use a lot of this data to help us predict the onset of diseases, conditions, ailments, and syndromes, and all that kind of stuff, which then actually gives the PT a lot more power to help people be even fitter in the future, but actually for that fitness to actually last longer as well. So typically, bearing in mind that the average age that people live to now is about 80. One of the things that we generally talk about in society isn't how long you live, it's how long you live well. So now, for example, we see 70-year-olds basically are still going down to the gym. I get overtaken by 70-year-olds on the bike, basically, when I'm actually out and about, which is still, frankly, embarrassing. And I wonder how they do it. Maybe they're on one of those electric bikes. That's where I'm missing the trick. But, we talk about basically living longer, but also being fitter for longer as well. And being able to spot the deterioration in someone's health sooner rather than later allows us to put slightly different programs and preventative measures in place. Maybe we can, so again, using different sensors, we can actually detect the onset of things like, rheumatoid arthritis, as well as general arthritis and other things. And we could then say, well, okay, look, we're starting to see your gait change. We're starting to see bone density change, which is something that you can do with smart scales, for example. So we can figure out bone density using that. In which case, we then start saying, so what we're going to do is we're going to put you on a program that actually increases bone strength and bone density, which is, let's face it, more of a sort of resistance type program. And again, from a PT and from a gym perspective, we can do all of these things, but your ability to bring customers into the gym, your ability to help gym goers be loyal and stay with you longer, also comes down to your ability to communicate your ability to do these things. So you say, look, we're not just a traditional gym. What we do is we actually use all of this information that we get from you, but also our own professional skill sets to analyze you and your performance and your health basically in new ways, which then lets us put a highly tailored plan in place. So from a gym perspective, you've also got to think about how you market these. Most of the gyms that I go to around the world, but they might sort of, by the way, use a cardio strap, or we can sell you a smartwatch basically for $100. From a gym goer's perspective and from a gym perspective, include some of these wearable devices actually in the gym subscription, because this is where you can start getting information from. So it is valuable in that perspective. And as we see, we've got a 20 to 30% of people in Western society actually go to a gym. And then I kind of joke basically that about 28% of those actually have a gym membership, but actually never go to the gym. They sort of go once or twice. Basically, they'll go to the coffee shop or the vending machine in the gym that's full of soft drinks, basically, and chocolates, which is another conversation. There's a staggering amount of stuff that the industry can actually do, both to improve the health and well-being of its clients, but actually differentiate itself in the marketplace.
Exactly. Here's an open question. So we're going to clone Matthew Griffin, right? We're going to have Matt 2.0. And before we've cloned him, you've obviously said all the bad bits of 1.0 and seen whether you can get rid of those bad bits for 2.0, Matt. And we've got 311 Gym alongside 311institute.com.
Yeah.
So now we've opened up your first gym. You're going to go global with your gym train. Tell me what you're going to do in the future for the experiences that we've just mentioned, and how we're going to move forward with getting some good results.
Yeah. So firstly, I suppose, so at the moment, I'm actually building a university. So I tend to say to my kids, basically, there are three things that you actually need to endeavor to be basically throughout your life, particularly when we actually have a look at the impact of the future, which is it's going to be faster paced. It's going to be more disruptive than people imagine, both in a good way as well as a bad way. And I say to my kids, basically, you've got to be smart, sporty, and social. That's it. So I've started a university a little while ago, basically, and that's a whole story in itself, where we're sort of looking at people's soft and hard skills. From a sports perspective, actually, I sponsor a couple of sports teams because I think it's actually important. So these are typically for children under about the age of 16. So typically from about the age of sort of 4 to 16. And they're athletics teams, pentathlon teams, and we've sort of got some really good results. In fact, some are actually now in Team GB as well, which is just phenomenal. That's it. And credit to them all. But if I was setting up a new gym chain, the first thing that I would actually do, and again, it comes down to resources and money, but just to put this into perspective, in my area, our ice rink is closing. Our football stadium is being turned into basically a block of flats once all the legal stuff's done. Our sports track basically is falling apart and is no longer actually being refurbished, partly because of COVID. Most of the pump rooms in the swimming pools basically are actually busted. So one of the places where my kids go was supposed to have a £1.5 million refurb this year, but it took them 3 years to get that money. That's all gone. So much so to the point that the kids are getting into the pool and they're getting out halfway through sessions because they are freezing cold, literally blue. I mean, that makes me cross in itself. So when we actually have a look at sports, from a grassroots perspective, you've got to have some good facilities. And increasingly, I think a lot of those facilities should actually be joined together. So we have a look, for example, at things like Lloyd's Gym, where you've actually got a variety of different activities under one roof. It's generally all well maintained, staff are friendly and everything else. So you've got to have some good facilities. Although, I know that people are going to argue with me and say, well, if you want to teach people cardio, all you need is a field, or a path around an estate. And I agree with that as well. But yeah, if we're sort of going to do this properly. So the first thing I would do is invest in good facilities where people are able to improve their physical health on the one hand, but actually also able to improve their mental well-being on the other. So this is where we talk about, calming facilities, energetic facilities, facilities that stimulate mind and body as well. You've got to bring in food as well. There are far too many sports centres, particularly around the UK, basically where the snacks that you have access to is a can of Coke and a Cadbury's Dairy Milk bar. Come on. I just worked on a treadmill to work 700 calories off, and I ate a chocolate bar. Now I've stuck another 1,000 on. What's the point in that? Plus, it's bad calories, and that's another conversation. So good facilities first. Secondly, I would actually hire staff who've gone through both mental health training, but also physical training. So like we sort of discussed with Premier Global, who are absolutely energetic and driven to deliver the best service. They're proactive. They've got the right attitude. They don't need to be managed, so they are self-managed. They are enthusiastic about turning up at work. They're enthusiastic about making a difference to people's lives, whether basically it is a young person, an old person, whatever it happens to be. And then from a technology perspective, this is sort of where you can really go big brother. I don't really like the big brother approach, but if we're sort of going down that tech route, you've got to be able to trust your staff, because ultimately they are the front of your business. They are the front of your business. They're the face of your business. If your staff come across really well to customers and everything else, then your customers are generally going to think, I like this business. But if we do sort of look at big brother, then increasingly, I would actually incorporate different areas within the gym. So I would have an area basically that is just completely private, where there is no, should we say, big brother surveillance. People can go into the weights room, the cardio rooms, or whatever it happens to be, the fitness studios, basically they can do whatever they want to do with whoever they want to do it, basically, and they can be trained in a traditional way. Yeah. However, for people basically who want that sort of that personalized touch, now that's a slightly different thing to personal touch. That's a human thing, but a personalized touch to their training. This is where we can use a corner of the gym that actually is sensor driven. So what I mean by sensor driven, this is where we're looking at wearables. This is where we're looking at camera systems. This is where we're looking at the use of artificial intelligence and big data, where, for example, as I mentioned earlier, we have artificial intelligence looking at people's form along with the trainers as well, from different angles, basically, and where AIs are increasingly able to say, well, look, let's use this kind of form, not that one. And if you want to be the Usain Bolt of running, basically, then, this is sort of what you need to do. But from a wearables perspective, I would also either partner with an organization that has a good quantified self platform, because building one yourself, let's face it, is an expensive hiding to nothing. So, when we have a look at things like Apple Health Kits, basically in Google and all these others, your ability to personalize and hyper-personalize someone's experience, provided that's what those people want, and you're able to explain the benefits of those hyper-personalized experiences, typically comes down to your ability to gather hard data, which is bits and bytes and everything else that flows off wearable devices, but then combine that basically with the observable data that PTs will actually see on the ground. And that's really what I would do. But I don't really think it's particular rocket science. It's have decent, well-maintained, clean facilities that allow people to do different physical activities that also caters to their mental health as well. It's having engaged, proactive, alert and attentive and knowledgeable staff at front of house as well as back of house who enjoy what they're actually doing and love showing up to work. And then infusing, should we say, a tech stack into that for the people, basically, for the people and for the customers who actually want and don't mind having that sort of more personal experience. And when it comes to informing customers about what technology could actually do for them, that's an education piece, which again is generally left up to the gyms. You know, when you have a look at Apple and Google and Huawei and Samsung and everything else, you know, who I also work with, they will provide you with the tools, but they won't really do that great a job of saying, look, if you use our quantified self platform or our wearable platform, this is what these are the health outcomes that you can actually expect. So increasingly from a gym perspective, you should actually start teching. And when you start explaining to someone, you say, from a privacy perspective, what we want to do is we want to capture and analyze all of the data that's actually coming off you. Now, how regularly you get on the mountain bike. You know, I'm always on the mountain bike. You know, what you're doing outside of the gym, because again, gyms only really see what you're doing in the gym, unless you're having a conversation and someone says, yeah, you know, I'm in the gym 3 days a week. But for the other, 4 days a week, I'm actually on the mountain bike. Basically, I'm actually playing squash at my company's local club. I'm doing a bit of golf. I'm sprinting around the athletics track as it's falling apart or whatever it happens to be. You know, quantified self data will let you see what your customers have been doing when they haven't actually been in your direct field of vision. Plus, the more quantified self data that you have, the better the digital platform that you're able to either buy into, subscribe, or develop. You can then start offering people experiences through a screen when they're at home. So you can say, well, you can come down to us, 3 days a week, but then when you're actually at home, we can take all of this data, and if you've got 10 minutes free in the morning, we can create a tailored, for example, stretching program for you that you can do. There's all sorts of things that we can actually do. A lot of it comes down to, money, cost, resources, and effort. And if you really want customers to get the best from you, if you want customers to be loyal to you, you've got to show them the value. Every single customer basically will say, the reason why I left the gym and I canceled my subscription is because I just wasn't seeing the results. Yeah, let alone basically I just didn't enjoy it. I wasn't having a chat with people. I'd go in, people would ignore me. So I was being ignored. I didn't see results. So I just canceled the membership and I ended up going somewhere else maybe, or just doing nothing.
But we are allowing them to think like that, aren't we? Because we're not actually helping them to realize the results that they're actually gaining.
No, I mean, PTs, PTs basically will sort of know this, Yeah, the first time you see a new member, basically you sit down with them and you ask them what generally their physical goals are. So again, ask them what their mental goals are as well. You'll then develop a personalized program for them. Generally, you'll then have review stages where after, a couple of days, a week, 2 weeks, or whatever it happens to be, you'll sit back down with them and say, how's it actually going? How are you feeling? And you sort of measure their progress on the charts, basically, that you've developed for them. But it's, again, that's that sort of personal touch. Bearing in mind that, if 20 to 30% of the UK's population actually have a gym membership, bearing in mind that a lot of them don't actually ever really use it. If you sort of go and listen to Martin, what is it, on Compare the Market or whatever he is, the money saving expert, he'll go and check your memberships because you've probably got a gym membership that you're not using. Cancel that straight away. Yeah, it's that personal touch that is absolutely crucial in today's world, because if you are a gym that is not providing a personal touch, if the PTs are standing behind a desk, or even if they were actually walking around and actually not engaging with customers, then frankly, why don't I just watch Joe Wicks on the television? Because I'm getting the same level of interaction basically from him, but actually at least he's talking to me through the television. Yeah. So, and this is it. And so this is the differentiated value that you can actually offer. But then in addition to that, if you do actually have motivated and engaged staff, you can charge a premium. The people down the road, was it 24/7 gym or Fitness First and all these other these other organizations basically sort of can say, well, we're £35 a month. And you can say, well, we're £50 a month, but the reason why we're £50 a month is because of X.
Yeah.
And I see plenty of gyms now that are charging, frankly, very expensive subscriptions for absolutely nothing that you can't get from some of these, 24/7 gyms.
Yeah.
In which case, why am I paying more to you than someone else?
Well, it comes back to price point. And that's, again, risky, isn't it? Price point is risky for, obviously, if you have a higher price point.
Well, it's, and someone I was talking to yesterday, they said, if you want to know the value of your service, the market's price point will tell you. If you're charging £70 basically for your gym memberships, but you don't really have many people coming through the door and they say, well, actually you're expensive, then actually they're not, either you're not communicating the value or they're not seeing the value. So the market is a great leveler basically when it comes to trying to figure out just how much value you're actually offering.
Yeah. That's a good
point. If you're in that sort of that cheaper end of the market where it is literally, here's a set of equipment, basically come in and use it and then you leave, then that's fine. But if you're sort of charging north, basically of sort of, 50, let alone 100, 150 pounds that I see quite a lot of gyms now doing, and you're providing the same level of engagement, support and service, basically as a gym that is literally just standing up equipment for people to use, then what are you up to?
You've mentioned AI a few times.
Yeah.
And it's a phrase and it's a term that we've all come a lot more accustomed to over the last couple of years, especially.
Yeah.
I want to pick out human intelligence, and I've watched a couple of your keynotes, and you've made a couple of good keynotes, which obviously resonate in my memory now. In terms of, it sounds like I'm talking like I know what human intelligence is, Matt. But what the hell is coming next in terms of what you're saying and seeing about human intelligence?
So when we have a look at human intelligence, when we have a conversation basically about the future of sports, basically there are an increasing number of people that talk about automation in sports, both in personal training but also coaching. Now, I've alluded to some of this, for example, where we have an artificial intelligence that can actually watch you as you are performing particular exercises, and the artificial intelligence can actually then coach you back and say, extend your stride, whatever it happens to be. Now, that's more at the elite level, but these types of artificial intelligence coaches are actually coming downstream, which means that they're going to be a lot more accessible for people to use. They're going to be a lot more affordable for people to use, and we're going to see the technology actually ultimately democratized. Now, one of the trends that I've actually seen increasing, certainly with the big sports giants, basically, is the use of digital humans, where we use a mixture of artificial intelligence, neural networks, high definition rendering, as well as what we call digital human platforms, or a digital human OS, as we see coming out of organizations like Soul Machines down in New Zealand, as well as others, where, today we might be watching Joe Wicks performing particular exercises, but as computer power lets us render more lifelike humans, increasingly we're starting to see digital humans taking the role of personal trainers in fitness videos. Now, it's at a very early stage, but if people want to sort of know what I'm talking about, go and have a look at a Soul Machines digital human. Increasingly they look lifelike. With a lot of the organizations who have actually started developing digital humans, one of the first places they started basically is biomechanics. And of course, in the fitness world, basically we're kind of all about the biomechanics. So now that we have artificial intelligences that are able to create digital humans basically with the right biomechanical structures and abilities, we start sort of getting interesting. But from an artificial intelligence perspective, we can increasingly see how some aspects of fitness coaching and training or monitoring, if we're just watching, can be automated. But from a human intelligence perspective, what we're seeing the use of automation at the lower end of the markets. This is in other industries, but this will eventually come to the sports industry. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing the automation of what we call low-level cognitive work and manual labor, basically in other industries. So from a human intelligence perspective, this is where if you want to say, for example, provide training to 1 billion people at scale, increasingly in the future, in the sort of the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to use a digital human to do that, because you don't have to pay Joe Wicks. These digital humans basically can be all designed in parallel, so they can be watching you through the cameras and the sensors on your devices, whether it's your TV, your tablet, basically whether it's your smartphone, and they can personalize themselves exactly to your situation, again, using quantified data. So, for example, a digital human can take the same cortisol data that you as a PT can take from a wearable watch, understand that somebody is slightly stressed, and then the artificial intelligence can design a custom-tailored program that helps you unwind and chill out before taking you into the sort of the main part of your program. But from a PT's perspective, this is where, and from a human intelligence perspective, this is where we end up being pushed up the stack. So we end up doing the more complex programs. We end up doing the more complex routines and exercises. Mm-hmm. We end up doing a lot more of the complex communication and engagement stuff. AI is getting much better at a greater number of things much faster. And it is one to watch out for. But I always say that when we start seeing disruption coming into a particular industry, and these digital humans they've not made their mark on the sports industry yet at all. But, in my field, I can see them being developed all over the place. As and when they do come, disruption from a business perspective is both a threat, because it can start taking your business away. So, for example, imagine Apple creating a digital human trainer as opposed to an individual, as opposed to hiring thousands of PTs, and they can just extend that at scale. Essentially, you're paying for compute. You're not paying for a human to actually perform the actions that we see in a particular video. And if people are sort of wondering how a digital human can actually show people, for example, how to do a yoga pose, this is where we get into the concept of synthetic media, synthetic content, kind of like deep fakes, basically where we see artificial intelligence actually creating the video and the sound that you see on a screen. That's how we do it. Then that disruption is a threat to established organizations. It's also an opportunity, because all of a sudden, from an Apple perspective, they can be doing personalized training to 1 billion to 2 billion people around the world for the sake of £2 a month, if that. They can charge whatever they like, and they'll charge more than that. Yeah. But it's staggering when you have a look at what technology is, how technology is disrupting other industries, what it's already letting us do. It's something that you need to get your head around, need to actually at least get a point of view on, and actually understand, and then figure out, is this a benefit to you? Is it a threat to you? Is it an opportunity to you? And then use it accordingly. And it, again, how you use technology within your own business and within your own particular environment very much depends on the part of the market that you're trying to target. And even if we actually have a look at PTs, throughout the pandemic, I know loads of PTs that suddenly couldn't go and see customers and everything else. All of a sudden, they started YouTube channels. Yeah. This is technology lets us decentralize and democratize access to services, in this case, a personal trainer, in new ways, because you can be doing a YouTube live event as a personal trainer now, watching the comments come in, and people can be going, that's great, I really love what you've sort of done there, but I've got a dodgy hip, so what could I actually do for me? So there's a lot of different ways that technology is increasingly having an impact basically on the customer experience. And that's before we start talking about the impact of virtual reality. So my kids have got Oculus Quests and all that sort of stuff, and they muck around with those. And virtual reality basically is still relatively nascent. But actually, there are some fun things that you can do. I mean, so for example, my son basically was actually running around Cairo the other day. And on the virtual reality side of things, when we actually talk about the use of virtual reality basically within the sports setting, we've got virtual reality headsets and environments and content and everything else. We've got an increase in the amount of haptics. So haptics actually let you feel things. It's a little bit like tactile sense. Vodafone a little while ago showed off a 5G demonstration where they had a connected punching bag, really. And they had an English rugby player who was dressed in a haptic suit. And someone in Coventry tackled the rugby bag, and the professional rugby player in London, 150 miles away, fell on his feet. Yeah, so this sort of stuff. And then we've even seen the development of electromagnetic floors and all kinds of things that actually are like, I mean, they're sort of like big squares that move around, and we've got a whole variety of different virtual reality treadmills and all this sort of stuff. But we've got things like electromagnetic floors that, as you are actually running on the spot, basically in your living room, these floors are changing beneath you, so that all of a sudden we are taking what has traditionally been a relatively static virtual reality activity, where you have 2 feet planted on the ground. You're not walking, you're not running, you're not sort of swinging around. And all of a sudden, we can now add motion and all this other sort of stuff into it. We've seen the use of virtual reality and haptic clothing, basically in boxing, for example, where people can actually box. Basically, you can feel like you're being hit, if you like that kind of thing. Even when we start looking at Pokemon Go that we sort of talked about, we've got the use of things like Microsoft Mesh, basically, which is sort of more augmented reality and mixed reality, where we can create augmented reality sports that people can actually partake in at the same time. So you can be on different continents and yet you're still playing, chase the Pokemon or catch the ball, for example. I've seen one of the tech giants showing off recently, sort of in their labs, virtual reality baseball, as well as an augmented reality baseball system, where, you'll stand there basically with a bat, but someone on a different continent is throwing a ball at you and you're smacking it out the park. So when I literally say that technology allows us to decentralize access to all sorts of different services, including sports, there's a lot of interesting things coming down the line. That's it. And it's, some of it, let's face it, is interesting and fairly useless from a day-to-day perspective, particularly when we start having a look at gyms and that sort of stuff. But, one of my big sport apparel customers, basically, that pretty much everyone is probably wearing, has bought stuff from, they're experimenting with building sort of virtual reality and augmented reality superstores, where you go in and you can play 100 different sports all under one roof.
Wow.
And that's fun, because again, so when I was having a chat basically with one of the directors over there, he said, my kids basically are typical. On the first week, basically, they want to play football. So I go and buy them all the football boots and everything else. Yeah. Basically, in the second week, they're no longer interested in football. They want to play hockey. So then I buy them all the hockey gear. And then this third week, they're no longer interested in hockey. They want to do swimming, and then they want to do cycling. He said, frankly, as a parent, basically, you sort of want to encourage your children to have as many different sports experiences as possible so they can find, what they really enjoy. But frankly, as a parent, it's really expensive and time consuming and everything else. So with some of these new superstores, basically, that are already starting to come through, the idea is that you can take your child basically down to experience 100 different sports all under one roof. And then they can go, oh, I kind of like that. And then you can do it in the real world, or they go, oh, I like that today, but actually, no, hang on, I like that yesterday. I don't like it today. And you can sort of figure out, I can
resonate with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, this is it, So, I mean, there's all sorts of different sort of fundings coming through. But even from a gym perspective, you can incorporate some of these augmented reality and virtual reality, sort of 5G enabled sports, basically just in the corner of the gym, and again, a lot of them look fairly basic today because they are relatively basic. But nevertheless, when we sort of talk about the physical health, but also playing to people's mental health, we're now starting to see the use of virtual reality in helping treat chronic pain. Mm. Because, for example, you could be using virtual reality in a corner of a gym, but, when treadmill companies are starting to sort of think about this kind of thing, you can have a virtual reality headset on, which is a bit dangerous on a treadmill, let's face it, but that's a different story. You can be running on a treadmill and you can be running through a wood, with butterflies flapping about and all this kind of stuff, which actually helps you relax. So, when we have a look at the use of different immersive technologies, basically within a sports environment, there's still quite a long way to go before the technology actually feels natural and immersive. And, you all of a sudden don't fall off the end of the treadmill, basically, and break an arm and then start suing the gym. So, health and safety will have a riot, basically, with most of these things. But a lot of these things are starting to come through. And it's actually sort of, I'd encourage people to at least go and have a look at them. And then, again, getting that point of view. Because it might not be right today, but, in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, it might actually be a case that these things are much more mature. And you go, well, I'll have an immersive reality corner of the gym. And again, that plays to the customer experience again.
Yeah.
And it's relatively cheap once it's actually embedded and once it's put in.
And the opportunity comes across problems that gyms are trying to solve. So back in 2005, I got asked from the owner of the gym that I was working in at that time, we have 40% of our opening times. We have a studio that is used 40%. So how can we increase our revenue for this space?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking straight away, you know, the examples you're talking about there, back in 2005, I would have loved to have the opportunity to improve the usage of that space with what we're talking about today.
Well, that's it. I mean, yeah. So one of the areas I also work with is super yachts, and super yachts basically a sort of fairly interesting sort of space.
What's a super yacht?
So there's three types. When we talk about big yachts, you know, sort of owned by billionaires, basically there's actually three types. So a lot of people might not know this. There are actually three types of yachts. We've got a super yacht. So a super yacht is typically classified as a yacht that costs more than $100 million.
Okay.
Then we have mega yachts, and mega yachts basically are large yachts that typically cost more than about $500 million, with a B dollars. And then we have giga yachts, basically, and a giga yacht basically is a yacht that costs more than $1 billion. So when we actually have a look at the super yacht industry, you know, the vast majority of the world's billionaires go, so what I have is I have this super yacht and I want all these toys and gadgets and everything else. And fitness is generally in there. You know, a lot of the super yachts in the past would have their private gyms and all that sort of usual stuff. But when you actually have a look at high net worth individuals and what they're really sort of trying to now get out of their super yacht investment, bearing in mind, I mean, there's one at the minute that I know that's being built, and it's a $750 million super yacht. You know, I mean, this is a sector of the market basically where people go, what do you want? Would you like a country to come with your vehicle, you know, your super yacht? And it's like, oh yes, I'd like Bolivia, please. It's an insane world. But actually, increasingly, when we have a look at the world of super yachts, we're now increasingly talking about developing fully immersive holodecks, like the ones that you see in Star Trek. We've got Gene Roddenberry, for example, is now developing what we call a set of parallax screens that give us a holodeck feeling. So this three-dimensional holodeck feeling. And for those people that sort of don't know what a holodeck is, a holodeck basically is a relatively science fiction-like technology. Essentially, it's a room outfitted with immersive reality technologies. So, for example, holographic projectors and systems and everything else that fool your five senses into thinking that you are actually in a different place and time. For example, that you really are in a wood or a jungle or a forest or a desert or a city or whatever it happens to be. And you know, even when we start having a look at the development basically of these sci-fi like holodecks, when you start using more sort of augmented reality, basically like sort of Microsoft Mesh, and you combine that with parallax screens. So this is where, for example, you have screens on every single wall, the floor, as well as the ceiling, basically of a particular room. All of a sudden, people feel transported to a completely different place. And if you're running, let alone if you've got some of these odd sort of slightly slippery virtual reality treadmills basically in there, you can be running basically, and you increasingly feel as though you are running through a completely authentic environment. And as I say, you know, when we actually have a look at HNWs and UHNWs, you know, they're no longer talking about just having a gym. You know, I would like a bunch of pre-core equipment and life fitness and hammer strength equipment basically in my nice, you know, super yacht gym. They're increasingly talking about how they can incorporate some of these higher end technologies to help them create fitness and sports-like experiences that we couldn't have made before. You know, like, for example, being able to play baseball or rugby, basically, while you're on your super yacht and somebody else is in New Zealand or on their super yacht, you know, and you're playing catch or whatever it happens to be with them. There's some quite frankly nutty stuff coming through. Yeah. When we sort of bring this back to gyms, you know, again, a lot of it is completely impractical, basically, within the gym environment, but also it does play to that customer experience. It does help gyms differentiate themselves. You know, a little bit like these golf simulators. You know, I've got a golf simulator in the corner of the gym. You know, I mean, companies like Airbus are actually looking at putting virtual reality and these sort of simulators actually into the future A330 Neo and the sort of the Airbus concepts that they're generating for sort of 2030, 2040, 2050, so that you can be at 30 to 40,000 feet in the air and you are playing a sport. while you're in business class, obviously, but you're playing some form of sport or doing some form of exercise, authentic feeling exercise, while you're at 30 to 40,000 feet and stuck in a really small cabin.
Yikes. Imagine.
Yeah.
It's going to be our futures, Matt.
Yeah, but there's a whole bunch of nutty stuff sort of coming through, which then brings us back basically to all the pulley equipment that we actually see down the gym. I say while we're doing pull downs and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, and that's going to be the blend, isn't it, of traditional versus new, whatever that phrase would be. I guess. Yeah. The one I really enjoyed you mentioned before is that you allow the experience for what the user wants. So if they want an offline concept, go into that area of the gym. It's offline, traditional. But if you want a personalized approach where we can help you, we can guide you, we can teach you, we can coach you, this is the area that we can then get that data from. That for me was like, yes, that's exactly where we must go.
Or even more of a tech-centric approach. I mean, if you actually have a look at the vast majority of millennials, my kids basically are already starting to exercise in virtual reality. Yeah. And we've seen and because virtual reality helps you visualize different environments better. We see this in the Olympics. We see this, we see this in Olympic cycling. We see this same approach being used in Formula One. Typically, you get a 30% improvement in performance because people are able to visualize themselves running around a track, or cycling around a track in Rio or London or China or wherever it happens to be, or driving around a track. If you have a look at a lot of the Formula One organizations, especially in the UK, they will actually use virtual reality simulators where you have the likes of Lewis Hamilton, who will be sitting in a physical replica of the car that he's normally driving, but they'll have virtual reality headsets on. They'll have pulleys on their necks, basically to demonstrate different G forces and everything else. But it'll be bending into the curves of, say the Abu Dhabi circuit, which I know is probably not his favorite at the minute. Yeah, but they'll be doing that. But the other thing that was starting to see coming through, again, really at an elite level, and this has been over the past 5 years, is actually the use of what we call neuro training. So the US Olympic team a little while ago basically used neuro training. So this is where we use what we call TMS devices to modify people's brain waves, which is it is literally neuroscience on steroids. But in the case of the US ski team, they managed to use neuro training to improve the performance of their Olympic athletes by 70%, 70%. Bearing in mind that when you're actually in the when you're part of an Olympic team, if you can grind out a gain of 0.5 to 1%, basically, then that's stunning. As we saw with the razor suits, for example, with Speedo and all those kinds of guys. There's a phenomenal amount of different stuff coming through. But as I say, my kids are already starting to do training in virtual reality, mainly because they like it, not really because they're sort of forced to. But again, with a lot of the organizations that I work with, increasingly starting to step up the use of wearables basically in their training as well. Because as I sort of mentioned, some of the teams that we actually sponsor, the kids basically are sort of under 16, but they're actually already competing in Team GB. I think we've now got about 14, 15 athletes basically who are actually in Team GB, even though basically we've not been able to travel for international or world's competitions. And so a lot of the kids that are starting to come through are already starting to get accustomed and acquainted with technology that lets them do new things in new ways. And these kids basically will be coming through into the gyms in 10 plus years time. And even on that sort of front, my kids basically can't step foot in a gym to even go on a treadmill until they're 12. They can't do resistance training basically until the age of 16. So we're sort of having to find, lots of different alternative ways to actually help them improve everything from sort of swimming and shooting, basically, and, cycling and all that kind of stuff, triathlons, for example, and things. And yeah, they like it. But certainly my son, he can't wait to get into a gym. he's gagging to get on a treadmill and blast it out.
2 questions. Will esports be in the Olympics one day?
Ooh. So actually, they are actually talking about putting esports into the Olympics, because even though a lot of people go, well, is esports actually a sport in itself in terms of, sort of the way that we traditionally think of sports where you're pushing yourself physically? A lot of the esports athletes will typically say, well, we're pushing ourselves cognitively, And if you think sitting in front of a screen for 8 hours doesn't require physical stamina, then you're wrong. So so ironically, the IOC is already thinking about incorporating esports. And when we have a look at esports, we've got Qatar basically that are building $1 billion sports university. So they're sort of starting to build that up as a sports campus. The Middle East are going all in on esports, particularly Saudi Arabia. They hosted the latest esports tournaments. And again, when you have a look at esports, they're an interesting model, particularly when you start combining virtual reality, when you start combining haptics. Because again, if you're doing, say, Call of Duty, basically you're doing Dota 2 or StarCraft or any of these kinds of things, you can literally be running around the environment. So esports basically is almost this esports, which typically started off as, you sit in front of a screen and you use a keyboard and mouse and, different controllers basically to do different things. When we start having a look at future technology, a lot of it's coming straight into esports, where we are now starting to see esports make huge use of immersive reality technologies with championships like Realms, if people know that, which had a $32 million prize fund. Yeah, and they had something like 50 million people turn up. I mean, it's nuts. Esports markets are nuts, and they're taking off big style. But when you have a look at the use of new immersive technologies in esports, increasingly the people who are sitting in front of a screen for 8 hours are now starting to get out of their seat and actually start running around basically particular environments, shooting people and doing whatever it is they're up to.
And the second question, what is on your downloaded podcast list at the moment, Matt?
So I've got loads of different stuff. So I must admit, basically, I like listening to EDM and all that kind of stuff. So I've got Tiesto. I've got a lot of business podcasts and everything else. So I've got podcasts basically like Futurecast as well, and all these sorts of things. Singularity. So typically, because one of the sort of the biggest problems I have is what I do is I'm an information junkie. And when I'm actually down the gym and I'm doing weights and everything else, you can't watch a YouTube video and all that sort of stuff. So I must admit, I do, when I'm out on the bike, that's probably going to sound wrong. But when I'm out on the bike, basically, I'll actually be sort of, watching a little bit of YouTube videos, but also listening and everything else. So summer's my favorite time because I've done about 3,000 miles basically on my mountain bike, and I learn like that. But when I'm actually down the gym, increasingly I'll sort of listen to podcasts, and I'll be doing some benching. The ankles basically still don't like me doing anything basically that involves standing. So I listen to all kinds of different stuff.
Awesome.
In fact, my podcasts basically are a bit of a mess. It'll jump from Hard House like Tiesto basically, or whatever it happens to be, or Above and Beyond basically, and then it'll go basically to a sort of Reid Hoffman, let's talk about the future of business podcast, and all sorts of weird things.
That's the beauty of the platform, isn't it? You can go from one place to another.
Yeah. Although we've got the Andy Rowe show as well, which is a good sports podcast. So those guys basically actually do the rugby pod as well. So sort of, I've done a lot for them. And there's quite a lot of good stuff on the Andy Rowe show as well. So go and check that one out.
We could talk to you for hours and hours. If our listeners wanted to go and find out a little bit more about Matthew Griffin, where can they go?
So go to the web. So 311institute.com. There's thousands of articles. If you go to my YouTube channel, basically you can see Futurist Sports as well as Future of everything else. I've got a load of reports and codexes that are free for people to download. So if you want to know about the latest 250 exponential technologies that are only going to change everything about society, culture, and global behavior, then that's on the website as well. But YouTube channel basically and the website basically is always a good point.
Awesome. And I've watched a couple of those and they are incredible.
Yeah.
Gets your brain working. Let's put it that way.
Well, this is it. You need a physical workout and you need a mental workout for your brain.
Hey,
it's no good basically if you're physically fit, but if you're a mental potato by the age of 60.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining us on the episode.
Nice pleasure. Cheers, Craig. Take it easy, everyone. Nice talking to you all. Bye.